No warning, no air raid siren, no fighter jets in the sky, and yet one of Iran's most critical military facilities is now completely gone, engulfed in flames within minutes. Officials are calling it an accident, but the evidence tells a very different story. Because this wasn't a strike from above. Someone, or something, got inside. And what happens next could change the entire balance of power in the region. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this explosion matters more than almost anything else happening in Iran right now. Welcome back to the Sci-Fi Life. Now listen, if you're one of those folks who still writes real letters, remembers rotary phones, and doesn't quite trust all this subscribe button business, let me just say this. Think of it like signing the guest book at church. Doesn't cost you a thing, takes 2 seconds, and it means the world to us that you stopped by. So go on and tap that subscribe button. We'd be honored to have you back. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. A massive fire has torn through one of Iran's most important military-industrial sites, and officials are struggling to explain exactly what happened. The blaze broke out at a large petrochemical facility in western Iran, in Loristan province. According to the provincial governor, the fire quickly grew out of control. Firefighting crews on the ground have been unable to contain it. Video from the scene shows thick black smoke rising for miles, with flames still burning long after the first reports came in. At first glance, this might look like just another industrial accident. Fires happen at chemical plants, equipment fails, accidents occur, but a closer look at this specific facility tells a very different story. This was not an ordinary factory. It produced petrochemicals used directly in Iran's military programs. These are the raw materials needed to make rocket propellant, explosives, and motor casings for ballistic missiles. They are also used to produce sealants, adhesives, and rubber parts found in drones and other weapon systems. In simple terms, this plant helped build the weapons Iran uses to threaten its neighbors and project power across the region. Losing a facility like this is not a small setback. It disrupts a key part of the supply chain that keeps Iran's missile and drone programs running. Replacing this kind of production capacity takes time, money, and specialized equipment. It cannot be rebuilt overnight. So the real question is not whether this fire matters. It clearly does. The real question is, how did it happen? Analysts studying the incident have pointed to one important detail. There is no sign that this was caused by an airstrike. No missile debris. No reports of aircraft in the area beforehand. No radar activity suggesting an aerial attack. If a foreign air force had struck this target, there would likely be visible evidence of that, and Iranian officials would almost certainly be blaming a specific country by now. Instead, Iranian officials are describing this as an internal incident, something that started inside the facility itself. That detail is exactly why so many analysts are skeptical of the accident explanation. A facility this important, tied directly to weapons production, does not simply catch fire by chance at a moment when tensions in the region are already this high. This raises a serious possibility. The explosion may not have come from the sky, it may have come from the ground. If that is true, it points toward a covert operation. Someone, somewhere, gained enough access to this facility to cause serious damage from the inside without triggering any of the usual warning signs of an outside attack. That kind of operation requires planning, inside knowledge, and precision. It is the kind of operation carried out by intelligence services, not by random chance. And this is not the first time something like this has happened in Iran. Over the past several years, there has been a pattern of unexplained fires and explosions striking Iranian military and nuclear-related sites. Some of these incidents happened before the current conflict even began. Others occurred during periods when a ceasefire was supposedly in place. Each time, Iranian officials offered a similar explanation: technical failure, electrical fault, or accident. And each time, the facility involved happened to be one connected to Iran's weapons or nuclear programs. Taken individually, each fire might be dismissed as coincidence. Taken together, they form a pattern that is difficult to ignore. A pattern like this suggests an ongoing quiet campaign, one that does not rely on fighter jets or missiles, but instead works from within. This latest explosion fits that same pattern almost perfectly. A critical facility, no air attack, an official explanation that raises more questions than it answers. And timing that lines up with a moment of rising tension between Iran and its adversaries. For now, the facility remains a smoking ruin. Firefighters are still working to bring the flames under control, and the full scale of the damage will likely take days to assess. But the loss is already significant. A key piece of Iran's ability to produce weapons has been taken off the board, and it happened without a single foreign aircraft entering Iranian airspace. As tensions in the region continue to build, this incident stands as a signal. It shows that Iran's most sensitive military sites may not be as secure as its leaders would like the world to believe, and it raises a pressing question that will shape everything that follows. If this facility could be reached and destroyed from within, what other targets might already be at risk? While the fire in Loristan was still burning, a different kind of announcement landed thousands of miles away, and it changed the tone of the entire conflict. The President of the United States confirmed that the ceasefire with Iran is officially over. The statement was direct. It said Iran had asked to continue talks, that the United States agreed to do so, but made clear in no uncertain terms that the ceasefire itself has ended. The message closed with a simple line of thanks for attention to the matter, as if closing a business memo rather than announcing the return of military action. At first, this might seem like a contradiction. How can a ceasefire be declared over while talks are still being offered? But looking closer, this is not confusion, it is strategy. What is emerging is a two-track approach. On one track, military pressure continues and possibly intensifies. On the other, a thin channel of diplomacy stays open, just enough to say that talks were never fully closed off. This lets one side keep bombing while still claiming the door to negotiation remains ajar. The logic behind this approach is not new. It follows a familiar pattern used in past conflicts. Apply military pressure, keep a diplomatic option visible in the background, and use that combination to push the other side toward concessions. If Iran refuses to bend under pressure, the argument becomes simple. Every opportunity for peace was offered, and Iran chose not to take it. That argument can then justify shifting fully toward a military solution, with fewer questions asked at home or from allies abroad. In other words, the bombing itself becomes a form of negotiation. Strikes are not just military action. They are also a message, an attempt to shape Iran's decisions without ever sitting across a table. Iran's response came quickly, and it was blunt. Iranian state media denied any reports of a new round of talks taking place. A source close to Iran's negotiating team rejected claims of finalized preparations for talks, calling such reports false and without basis. The source added that any real developments would only be announced through official Iranian channels. This kind of denial is not unusual. Whenever the United States signals the possibility of talks, Iran often responds immediately by rejecting the idea in public. This may be done to avoid appearing weak to its own population, or to avoid handing any diplomatic win to Washington before Tehran is ready to admit one exists. At the same time, there are signs that some form of indirect contact may still be happening. Reports suggest that intermediaries, including officials from Qatar, are involved in passing messages between the two sides. This kind of indirect channel allows both governments to maintain contact without either one having to publicly confirm that formal negotiations are underway. So the picture becomes clearer. Publicly, both sides are trading denials and tough statements. Privately, a narrow channel for communication may still exist, kept alive through third parties. Meanwhile, the military track moves forward without pause. This strategy carries real risk. Fighting while claiming to negotiate can easily spiral if either side misreads the other's intentions. A strike meant to apply pressure could be interpreted as a sign that negotiations have failed completely, pushing the other side to abandon diplomacy altogether. In a region already this tense, a single miscalculation could turn a controlled pressure campaign into a much wider conflict. For now, both governments appear to be testing how far this two-track approach can go. The United States continues to signal that force remains the primary tool, while leaving just enough room to claim diplomacy was never abandoned. Iran, for its part, continues to publicly reject any suggestion that it is negotiating from a position of weakness. What happens next will depend on whether this balance can hold. If military pressure continues to escalate while the diplomatic channel stays intact, the current standoff could continue for weeks without a clear resolution. But if either side pushes too far, the fragile arrangement holding both tracks together could break down entirely, and the ceasefire's collapse may only be the beginning of a much larger confrontation. Thousands of miles away from the smoke still rising over Loristan, a much quieter kind of signal was unfolding at sea. Two of the United States Navy's largest warships were moving, not retreating, not holding position, moving closer to Iran. Tracking data placed the USS Abraham Lincoln roughly 150 miles off the Iranian coast, pushing steadily northward. Alongside it, the USS George H.W. Bush was reported at a distance of approximately 162 kilometers, also advancing in the same direction. Two full carrier strike groups, each representing billions of dollars in military capability, were converging on the same stretch of water at the same time. To understand why this matters, it helps to understand what a carrier actually represents. It is not simply a ship. It is a mobile airbase, capable of launching dozens of fighter jets without needing permission from any neighboring country to use their airspace or runways. When a carrier moves closer to a coastline, it is not a symbolic gesture. It is a direct expansion of how quickly and how far military force can reach. By pushing north, both carriers were placing their aircraft within closer striking range of Iranian territory. Flight time drops, response time shrinks. Any decision to launch a strike could now be executed faster than it could have been just days earlier. This movement did not happen in isolation. Flight tracking data showed a noticeable increase in aerial refueling aircraft operating over the Persian Gulf. Refueling tankers do not fly for no reason. Their presence in these numbers strongly suggests fighter jets were already airborne, likely patrolling the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically sensitive waterways on the planet. A significant share of the world's oil shipments pass through that strait every single day. Fighter jets already in the air, supported by refueling tankers, sitting near a critical energy choke point, is not a passive posture. It is a posture built for speed. Aircraft already aloft and already fueled do not need to wait for a lengthy launch sequence. They can adjust course and enter Iranian airspace with very little warning if given the order. Taken together, these movements form a clear pattern. 2 carrier strike groups advancing toward Iran, combined with an active refueling and patrol presence over the Gulf. This is not accidental positioning. It reflects a deliberate buildup of readiness, and this buildup lines up directly with the 2-track strategy already in motion. If military pressure is meant to reinforce a diplomatic message, as discussed in Part 2, then visible naval movement serves a second purpose beyond combat readiness. It is also a signal, one meant to be seen and understood by Iranian leadership. The message is simple. The capability to strike quickly is not just available, it is actively being positioned closer in real time, while any diplomatic contact continues in the background. This kind of dual-purpose posture is common in periods of high tension. Military forces move, not necessarily because an attack is imminent, but because visible movement itself applies pressure. It forces the other side to consider new possibilities, recalculate risk, and respond to a changing map, all without a single shot being fired. But there is a serious risk built into this approach. The closer these assets move and the more active the surrounding air patrols become, the smaller the margin for error grows. A misread signal, a miscommunication, or an unexpected encounter between opposing forces in the Strait of Hormuz could escalate a tense standoff into direct confrontation almost immediately. Naval assets operating this close to a rival's coastline are not simply making a statement. They are placing themselves inside the blast radius of any potential miscalculation. For Iran, this posture presents a difficult choice. Ignoring it could be seen domestically as weakness. Responding to it, even defensively, risks feeding directly into the narrative that Iran is the side escalating the conflict, a narrative that could be used to justify further military action. As of now, both carrier groups continue their advance, and the skies over the Gulf remain active with fighter patrols and refueling support. The pieces are in position. What happens next depends on a decision that has not yet been made public, whether this show of force is meant purely as leverage or whether it is the opening stage of something far more direct. Behind the strikes, the ships, and the diplomatic maneuvering, a quieter and more personal danger has been building, one that adds an entirely different layer of risk to this conflict. According to a report from a major American news outlet, the President of the United States has left specific instructions to be carried out in the event that Iran succeeds in an alleged plot against his life. The instructions reportedly call for an overwhelming military response, described as a level of force unlike anything seen before in the conflict. The exact scale of that response has not been made public, but the message behind it is unmistakable. Any attempt on his life would trigger consequences far beyond the current campaign of strikes and counterstrikes. This is not the first time such a threat has been raised. For months, discussions around a so-called kill list have circulated, a list allegedly containing the names of individuals targeted for elimination in connection with the conflict. The full contents of that list have never been confirmed publicly, and it remains unclear exactly who is included. What is confirmed is that the threat itself is being treated with genuine seriousness at the highest levels of government. Serious enough that formal contingency instructions were prepared in advance. Adding weight to these concerns, intelligence shared by an allied government reportedly pointed to a possible assassination plot against the American president tied to Iranian involvement. That intelligence, described as unverified but credible enough to warrant attention, was passed along through official channels and has become part of the broader security picture surrounding the conflict. On the other side, lawmakers inside Iran have been moving in a direction that mirrors this same escalation. A member of Iran's parliament has publicly called for fast-track legislation targeting American and Israeli officials directly. If passed, this kind of legislation would formalize, at least on paper, a policy aimed squarely at individuals rather than at military targets or infrastructure. It represents a shift from broad strategic conflict towards something far more personal and targeted, aimed at specific people in positions of power. When these two threads are placed side by side, a troubling pattern appears. One side has prepared contingency plans in case its leader is targeted. The other side is actively pursuing legislation aimed at officials on the opposing side. This is no longer a conflict confined to missile strikes, naval movements, and diplomatic statements. It has expanded into a phase where individual leaders and officials themselves have become potential targets, a development that raises the stakes of any misstep to a deeply personal level. Taken as a whole, the past several days reveal 4 connected developments, each reinforcing the others. First, a critical facility tied to Iran's weapons production was destroyed, not by an airstrike, but in a manner suggesting covert action from within, part of a broader pattern of unexplained incidents striking Iran's military infrastructure. Second, the ceasefire between the United States and Iran has formally collapsed, replaced by a two-track approach combining continued military pressure with a narrow, unconfirmed channel for indirect talks. Third, 2 American aircraft carrier strike groups have moved closer to Iranian waters, supported by increased aerial refueling and fighter patrols, signaling a posture built for rapid response rather than passive deterrence. Fourth, the conflict has taken on a more personal dimension, with reported assassination-related intelligence, formal contingency planning at the highest level of government, and legislative moves in Iran aimed directly at individual officials. None of these 4 elements exist in isolation. Together, they describe a conflict that has moved well past its earlier, more contained phase. What was once a series of strikes and counterstrikes has evolved into a multi-layered standoff involving covert sabotage, naval posturing, and now direct threats against individual leaders on both sides. Looking ahead, several developments will be worth watching closely. Any further unexplained incidents at Iranian military or industrial sites would reinforce the pattern already established by the Loristan explosion. Continued movement or repositioning of American naval assets would signal whether the current show of force is temporary or the beginning of a longer deployment. And any concrete developments tied to the reported assassination plot or Iran's legislative response could shift this conflict into a phase that is far more difficult to de-escalate. For now, the situation remains unresolved, held together by a fragile mix of pressure, denial, and quiet maneuvering on both sides. Whether that balance holds or breaks will shape what comes next in a conflict that shows no clear sign of slowing down.